we're here to investigate Fort Erie. 200 years ago, 300 men lost their lives here. This is the anniversary of the date. There's been many claims made here in the fort. We're going to look into most of them and see what we can find, and hopefully we get some good evidence to show you guys. I'm really jazzed up about this investigation. Let's see what happens. We've been searching around the grounds and we can already feel the energy in the air. We can tell it's going to be an awesome night. You can just see, you can feel it. It's all around. So I'm really excited about what we're going to find. So,
the monument here was first constructed in 1904, and it was to celebrate the 90th anniversary of the siege of Fort Erie. It was originally located inside of the fort, which was in ruins. When they reconstructed the fort in the 1930s, they moved it out here because if you look at the inscription here, it'll tell you why. 153 men were discovered during the reconstruction, and they lie in state underneath this in a tomb.
wow.
The entrance has been sealed years ago, and the monument, pretty standard for that Victorian era monument, has listed the British officers killed. The other side lists all the regiments that served, and of course, dulce decorum est pro patria mori. There's honor and glory in dying in the name of your country. So that's the monument and the biggest grave site on the grounds.
Wow.
Here they're sighting of a fellow that's referred to as the Watchman. Now unfortunately, it's unlikely you'll get much out of him. He's only seen in the winter when there's snow. We have an idea of who he was. Not his name, but at least when he died. In the winter of 1809, 1810, the weather had dropped to such an extreme level that one of the British soldiers on guard duty froze to death in under 20 minutes.
Wow.
At this site of the original gate, which would have been here. So it would have been right up against the wall, and the reports that people get is they see a figure, and there's been talk of him challenging people who come. And what makes it interesting is you would think, how does a guard challenge? Who goes there? Who goes there is you're asking who's leaving. At the time you would have said, who comes here? So he's asking who's approaching, and that's what people say he says, and people talk of footprints leading from the main gate and following the wall here until it reaches the earthen embankment.
That's cool.
And also point out the original stone. On the bottom here,
Okay.
the black and gray stuff is Onondaga flint, and that's the stuff that was quarried originally, and some of the locals think it's cursed, but we'll talk about that inside.
I've also many experiences at all, but the one time I was in, like standing in there if it's raining, we usually have somebody on the front gate just to watch, you know, for visitors coming in and out. And it was raining the one time I was standing inside there, and it sounded like somebody was just knocking on the outside of it. Which we play a lot of pranks on each other around here, so I figured, but I came out and there's absolutely nobody around, so that's really the only thing I've had,
That's cool.
other than like kind of the strange feeling.
Cool.
Right on.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about the military fortifications there. Had always been a fort on this site since the 1760s. So the British Army built a wooden fort, actually just down, when we came down the path, we saw the dirt parking lot down there.
Yeah.
That was their first fort, was just down there. It was just a little wooden barracks kind of garrison. It collapsed almost within 10 or 15 years just because the weather was so bad. They built the second one in the same place, the same materials, same thing, collapsed as well. But by 1803, they decided they're going to plan a whole new fort, a whole new location, and a whole new material. So they start quarrying this Onondaga flintstone that Daryl just mentioned from Lake Erie itself, right out here, and they decided to move up to the current location we're in. So from 1803, they kind of set out the blueprints. From 1805 to 1809, they construct pretty much what you see right now, so Fort Erie. The plan is for it to be much larger than it actually was going, or that you see now.
Okay.
They ran out of money and supplies. The main reason in 1809, the British Army is fighting Napoleon in Europe at this point. So not a lot of supplies or money or concern is even really turned to Upper Canada or Fort Erie alone. It's kind of a strange place. But by 1812, war breaks out, as I'm sure you know. So we're invaded by the U.S. We see most of our action in the summer of 1814, so that's about 2 years after the war's already started. Starting to come down to kind of a really bloody stalemate. And the Niagara campaign of 1814 is more or less the bloodiest campaign in the entire war. fort. And so at Fort Erie, on July 3rd of 1814, there's about 137 British soldiers stationed inside, which is kind of what the fort was meant for, that size of a garrison. But that night, 3,000 U.S. soldiers crossed the Niagara River, just right from Buffalo over there. They get on land about a couple miles down. They march down, surround the fort. They fire a few shots. The British realize they're heavily outnumbered, and they surrender the fort right away. So almost immediately becomes just a U.S. occupied fort, but the whole summer is just a hotbed of fighting. The British build siege lines, which our rendition of the siege lines is that kind of dirt area that you saw back there. And realistically, it would have spanned about a mile backwards, and they would have had about 3,000 of their own soldiers that they brought down as well from the Niagara and the Lake area. So you had about 3,000 British soldiers, Canadian troops are there, as well as some of the native allies, fighting and trying to get back Fort Erie from the U.S. occupied inside. So that takes place almost entirely throughout the summer of 1814. Like some of the bloodiest battles in July of 1814. Chippewa is 2 days later after the capture here, and Lundy's Lane, which is one of the bloodiest single battles in Niagara Falls, happens on July 25th. But on August 15th of 1814 is pretty much like the bloodiest day at Fort Erie. What happens, they kind of plan several different attacks to take place throughout the fort to get it back. They launched one about a mile down the road where the U.S. fortifications ended at a place called Snake Hill. The regiment that went down there, they came down to attack. They were ordered to remove their flints from their muskets. If you know anything about firearms at that point, the flint is a piece of stone. You need that to start the spark, which starts the whole firing process. They were ordered to remove the flints because they had a lot of rookies. They were approaching at night and it was supposed to be a surprise. They didn't want anybody to accidentally pull the trigger, create that spark, and let them know. However, they have U.S. sentries out there. They actually can see them and hear them coming. So they open fire. You've now got more or less a regiment that can't fire back. So they saw heavy casualties down there. They run up to the earthen walls. They throw their ladders up to find out that their ladders are about 4 or 5 feet too short. So that regiment saw quite a bit of casualty numbers about a mile down the road. So there's a couple other attacks that go on. One's right out in front of the fort, kind of coming up around the water. The British casualties, the numbers were huge there as well. And then this demi-bastion right here is kind of one of the biggest things, the biggest draws about Fort Erie. So what happens about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, there's 300 soldiers of the 104th Regiment, which were a regiment from New Brunswick. Believe it or not, they'd marched here that entire winter. Yeah, that's quite a feat. Yeah. But they did make it here. They take part in the siege of Fort Erie, and they're led over top of those walls. And if you saw how far down that drop is, I mean, it's a huge drop. They make it over on their 4th try. They get over the walls, they come storming down. They make it up to about where that doorway is, that first doorway from here. And then this massive explosion takes place. Kind of, there was a powder magazine underneath exactly where they were standing, yeah. So what happened is, well, at least what's suspected by most historians today, is that when they came over the walls there, the U.S. Army had built a powder magazine. Well, there was a powder magazine down there, but they hollowed out the entire demi-bastion to make room for all the gunpowder they had. Like I said, they had 3,000 soldiers. The fort's really not meant to hold that many people or that much gunpowder, so they had to put it somewhere. So they made more or less what's called a ready mag. They just packed all of their gunpowder in there. So they're standing on top of that demi-bastion, not realizing that right underneath their feet are barrels and barrels and barrels of black powder, which goes up in a minute, like it's really quick. So they come over there. Some of our sources more or less say that what they do is there's a cannon up that way, and they turn it around to fire at the U.S. fort, or the U.S. fortifications in here, the U.S. forces. When they do so, what likely happened is that they ripped up some of the kind of crude floorboards that they had there, and that spark just got down into the powder mag. All it takes for black powder is one spark, and that's probably what happened. So with that explosion, it killed approximately about 300 soldiers right in that kind of immediate corner over there. Overall, throughout the entire summer, you see about a casualty number of about 3,000 as well. So pretty hallowed ground in this area. And we'll go through some of the Traditionally, in a fort like this, the young officers or the junior officers would usually share a room like this. So you'd have maybe 2 or 3 guys up here. They divide the room up with a sheet or a curtain or something like that. But we have it represented as just one officer. And the main reason has to do with the artifacts, specifically the bed that you see right there. So that bed belonged to a gentleman by the name of Captain Kingsley, and he served what was known as the King's 8th Regiment of Foot.
Nobody wanted your bed.
Let him take a picture now. I just heard a mummy again.